Lisa walked through the double doors of Riverside Community College with her head down, clutching a worn notebook against her chest. The hallways buzzed with students half her age, all seeming to know exactly where they belonged. At 28, she felt like she was pretending to be something she wasn't. The music building sat at the far end of campus, its brick walls covered in ivy that had seen better days. Lisa had driven past this place hundreds of times on her way to work at the hospital, but never imagined she'd actually walk through these doors. After 12 years of working the night shift as a clerk, filing papers and answering phones, she finally had enough saved up for one semester of classes. Room 240 held about 20 students, most of them young and eager. Lisa chose a seat in the back corner, close to the wall where she could almost disappear. The old upright piano at the front of the room looked tired, its wood scratched and keys yellowed with age. Still, seeing any piano made her heart skip a beat. "Welcome to intermediate." "Piano," said Professor Johnson, a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. "I know some of you are continuing from last semester, and others are just starting your musical journey." Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she opened her notebook. A musical journey. If only he knew how far she'd already traveled and how far she'd fallen. The other students introduced themselves one by one. There was Katie, a 19-year-old music major who'd been playing since she was 5. Tom, a college sophomore who wanted to impress his girlfriend. Maria, a retired teacher who'd always dreamed of learning piano. When they got to Lisa, she simply said, "I'm Lisa. I used to play a little when I was younger." That was the understatement of the century. As Professor Johnson demonstrated the first piece they'd be learning, Lisa watched his fingers move across the keys. The melody was simple, something a first-year student might tackle. Her fingers itched to play it properly, to add the subtle dynamics and phrasing that would bring it to life. But she forced herself to stay still, to listen like someone who was truly learning for the first time. "Now, let's have everyone try," Professor Johnson sighed. "Don't worry about mistakes. We're all here to learn." One by one, students took turns at the piano. Katie played confidently, showing off a bit with some extra flourishes. Tom struggled with the rhythm but pushed through with determination. Maria's fingers moved slowly but surely, counting out loud with each note. Then it was Lisa's turn. She walked to the piano bench, her heart pounding. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, like greeting an old friend after years apart. She played the piece exactly as written, nothing more, nothing less. Her technique was clean but unremarkable, her interpretation safe and boring. "Very good, Lisa," Professor Johnson said with a nod. "You clearly have some natural ability." Lisa almost laughed. If only he knew about the hours she'd spent as a child, practicing scales until her fingers bled. The competitions she'd won, the concerts she'd performed, the full scholarship to Juilliard she'd had to turn down when her father had his heart attack. After class, Lisa packed up her things quickly. She could hear the other students chatting excitedly about their plans to practice together, about upcoming recitals, about their dreams of playing in coffee shops or local venues. Their enthusiasm was infectious, but it also hurt. She remembered feeling that way once, when music was her whole world and the future stretched out before her like an endless symphony. "Lisa, wait up," called Maria, the retired teacher. "Are you heading to the parking lot? I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime and maybe practice together. I could use a study buddy." Lisa turned, surprised by the invitation. "That's really nice of you, Maria, but I work nights. I don't have much free time." "Oh, where do you work?" Maria asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "St. Mary's Hospital. I'm a clerk in the admissions office." Lisa shifted her notebook to her other arm. "Nothing exciting, just paperwork and phone calls." "Well, if you ever change your mind, I'd love the company. I get nervous playing in front of people." Lisa smiled, touched by the woman's kindness. "I'll keep that in mind." Walking across campus to her car, Lisa thought about Maria's offer. It would be nice to have a friend, someone to share this new chapter with. But friendships required honesty. And Lisa wasn't ready to explain why she could sight-read music like a native language, or why her fingers automatically found the right positions for complex chords. Her car was a 12-year-old Honda with a dent in the passenger door and a radio that only worked half the time. As she drove home through the familiar streets, Lisa passed the music store where she used to buy sheet music with her mother, the fancy restaurant where she'd played background music for wedding receptions when she was 16, the concert hall where she performed Chopin's Piano Concerto No. with the youth orchestra. Each landmark was a ghost of her former life. Her apartment was small but clean, with just enough space for the essentials. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo of her parents on their wedding day. In the corner where a piano should have been, there was only empty space and a folding chair she used for reading. Lisa made herself a simple dinner and sat at her small kitchen table, thinking about the day. The other students seemed so hopeful, so sure that learning piano would add something beautiful to their lives. She envied their innocence, their ability to approach music with pure joy, instead of the complicated mix of love and loss that filled her heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the hospital. "Can you pick up an extra shift Thursday?" Jenny called in sick. Lisa typed back a quick yes. She always said yes to extra shifts. The money was good, and staying busy kept her mind off things she couldn't change, but as she got ready for bed, Lisa found herself humming the melody from today's lesson. Her fingers moved unconsciously, playing the notes on her bedside table as if it were a keyboard. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not forgotten. She thought about Professor Johnson's words. We're all here to learn. Maybe that was true, even for her. Maybe she wasn't just hiding in this beginner's class. Maybe she was trying to find her way back to something she'd lost. The Lisa who used to play with abandon, who believed music could heal any wound, who thought talent was enough to overcome any obstacle. That night, Lisa dreamed of playing piano in a grand concert hall, her fingers flying across the keys with the confidence she'd once possessed. When she woke up, she could still feel the ghost of those notes under her fingertips, and for the first time in years, she looked forward to her next music class. The quiet woman who filed papers by night was about to discover that some gifts never truly disappear. They just wait patiently for the right moment to resurface, like flowers buried under snow, ready to bloom again when the time is right. 3 months had passed since Lisa first walked into that music classroom, and she had become a master of being invisible. She sat in the same back corner every Tuesday and Thursday, played her assigned pieces with careful mediocrity, and listened to her classmates discuss their practice schedules and musical dreams. The routine had become comfortable, almost therapeutic. For 2 hours twice a week, she could pretend to be a normal person learning a new skill, not someone carrying the weight of abandoned dreams and a gift too painful to fully embrace. Professor Johnson had grown fond of his quiet student in the corner. Lisa always came prepared, never caused disruptions, and showed steady but unremarkable progress. She was exactly the kind of student teachers appreciated but rarely remembered years later. "All right, everyone," Professor Johnson announced on a particularly gray October morning, "I have some exciting news. It's time to talk about your final performance." The room buzzed with nervous energy. Katie, the confident music major, sat up straighter. Tom, who had been struggling with a simple batch minuet, looked like he might be sick. Maria, the retired teacher, clutched her pencil tighter. Lisa felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral. "Each of you will choose a piece from the advanced repertoire list," Professor Johnson continued, walking to the whiteboard where he'd written several composer names. "This is your chance to challenge yourselves and show how much you've grown. This semester," he began writing titles on the board: Chopin's Minute Waltz, Debussy's Clair de Lune, Bach's Italian Concerto, and several others. Lisa recognized every single piece. She had performed most of them before her 18th birthday. "Now, I want you to think carefully about your choice," Professor Johnson said. "Pick something that will push you but not break you. You have 2 weeks to prepare." Students began raising their hands, calling out their selections. Katie confidently claimed the Chopin. Tom chose a simpler batch piece, Maria decided on a gentle Debussy. One by one, the easier pieces were taken. Lisa waited, hoping to blend into the background until everyone else had chosen. She would take whatever was left, probably something appropriately challenging but not impossible for someone with her supposed skill level. But Professor Johnson had other plans. "Lisa," he called out, looking directly at her. "You've been awfully quiet back there. What catches your eye?" 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at her. Lisa felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maybe something simple? Whatever's left is fine?" Professor Johnson frowned slightly. Over the past few months, he'd noticed something about Lisa that puzzled him. Her technique was cleaner than it should be for someone who'd only played a little as a child. Her musical instincts were too good for a beginner. Sometimes he caught her fingers moving silently along with demonstrations as if she already knew the pieces. "You know what, Lisa?" he said, making a decision that would change everything. "I think you're selling yourself short." Lisa's heart began to race. "No, really, I'm not ready for anything too difficult." "Nonsense." Professor Johnson turned to the board and wrote a new title in bold letters. "Liszt, La Campanella." The room fell completely silent. Even Katie, who had been the star of the class, looked shocked. La Campanella was legendary among pianists for its brutal technical demands. The piece required lightning-fast fingerwork, massive jumps across the keyboard, and stamina that would challenge even advanced players. "Professor Johnson," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I really don't think I can handle that." "Lisa, I've been teaching for 25 years, he replied, warming to his theme. "I can tell when a student has untapped potential. You have good instincts, steady hands, and you're more musical than you give yourself credit for. This piece will force you to grow." Lisa looked around the room at her classmates' faces. Some looked sympathetic, others curious to see what would happen. Tom whispered to the person next to him, "She's going to crash and burn." "But Professor Johnson," Lisa tried again, "what if I can't learn it in time? What if I embarrass myself?" "Then you'll learn something valuable about pushing past your comfort zone," he said firmly. "Besides, I believe in you even if you don't believe in yourself." Lisa stared at the title on the board, La Campanella. She had performed it at age 16 in a competition, winning first place and earning a standing ovation. The piece was like an old friend, its intricate passages and soaring melodies embedded in her muscle memory. But that was a lifetime ago. "I'll email you the sheet music tonight," Professor Johnson said, moving on to help other students finalize their choices. "Start slowly. Don't try to play it at full speed right away." As class ended, Lisa packed her things in a daze. Her classmates offered awkward words of encouragement as they filed out. "Hey, don't worry about it," said Katie, pausing by Lisa's desk. "Maybe you can ask him to switch to something easier before it's too late." "Yeah," added Tom. "That piece is insane. I've seen YouTube videos of professionals playing it. It's not meant for people like us. People like us." Lisa almost laughed at the irony. Maria, the retired teacher, was kinder. "You know, Lisa, sometimes teachers see things in us that we don't see ourselves. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise." Lisa nodded and smiled, but inside she was panicking. Not because she couldn't play the piece, but because she could. Playing La Campanella at her real skill level would expose everything she'd been hiding. It would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer, but playing it badly would be its own kind of torture. That evening, Lisa sat in her small apartment staring at her laptop screen. Professor Johnson had indeed emailed the sheet music, along with a note. "Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about pushing yourself to grow. I'm excited to see what you discover about yourself through this challenge." Lisa opened the PDF file and looked at the first page. The familiar notes stared back at her, bringing a flood of memories. She remembered her old teacher, Mrs. Chun, guiding her through the difficult passages. She remembered the hours of practice, the calluses on her fingertips, the pure joy of finally conquering each section. Her fingers moved unconsciously in the air, playing the opening phrases from memory. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not forgotten. She could feel the peace in her bones. The way it built from delicate bell-like notes to thunderous climaxes, Lisa closed the laptop and walked to her window. Looking out at the city lights, in 2 weeks she would have to make a choice. She could continue hiding, playing the piece badly, and maintaining her cover as a struggling beginner. Or she could risk everything and show who she really was. The thought terrified her. She picked up her phone and almost called Professor Johnson to beg for a different piece. But something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity about whether she could still play at her old level. Maybe it was exhaustion from pretending to be less than she was. Or maybe it was just time to stop running from her past. Lisa put down the phone and made herself a cup of tea. Tomorrow she would start practicing. She would go to the music building early, find an empty practice room, and see what remained of the pianist she used to be. For the first time in 12 years, Lisa was going to play La Campanella again. The question was, would she play it as the timid hospital clerk everyone thought she was, or as the virtuoso she had once been? The next 2 weeks would change everything. The next morning, Lisa woke up at 6 a.m. with her heart already racing. She hadn't slept well, tossing and turning as melodies from La Campanella played on repeat in her mind. The piece was calling to her like a song she'd forgotten she knew. She arrived at the music building before it officially opened, waiting by the entrance with her worn notebook and a coffee that had already gone cold. The janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, recognized her from her early morning visits over the past few months. "You're here early again," he said with a smile, unlocking the doors. "Most students don't show up until noon." "I work nights," Lisa explained. Which was true, but not the whole truth. "This is the only time I can practice." Practice room C was her favorite. It was tucked away at the end of the hallway, small and forgotten, with a piano that was slightly out of tune but still playable. More importantly, it was where nobody would hear her. Lisa sat at the bench and opened the sheet music. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys. For a moment she just sat there, breathing deeply, trying to calm her nerves. Then she began to play. The opening notes came out hesitant and shaky. Her fingers, hardened by years of hospital work, felt stiff and clumsy. The delicate passages that had once flowed like water now stumbled and caught. She stopped after just a few measures, frustrated and embarrassed. "Come on," she whispered. To herself, "You used to know this piece like your own name." She tried again, this time playing even more slowly. Note by note, measure by measure, she began to remember. Her muscle memory was like an old photograph that had been stored in a dusty attic, faded, but still recognizable when brought into the light. By the end of the first hour, she was playing the opening section cleanly, but without any of the magic it once had. Her technique was rusty, her timing uncertain. The 12 years of silence had taken their toll. Over the next few days, Lisa's routine changed completely. She would finish her shift at the hospital at 7 a.m., drive straight to the college, and practice until noon. Then she would go home, sleep for a few hours, and return to work. Her coworkers noticed the change. "You look tired," said Janet, the other night clerk. "Are you okay?" "Just taking a class," Lisa replied, filing another stack of admission forms. "It's keeping me busy." What she didn't tell Janet was that she was becoming obsessed. Each morning, she could feel a little more of her old self returning. Her fingers were regaining their flexibility. Her ears were remembering how to hear the subtle differences in tone and dynamics. Most importantly, the music was starting to feel like home again, but it wasn't easy. There were mornings when she wanted to quit, when the gap between what she remembered and what she could currently play felt too wide to bridge. Her hands would cramp after an hour of practice, unused to the intensive work. Sometimes she would hit a wrong note and feel like crying. During regular class time, Lisa continued her act. She played the simple pieces assigned to the class deliberately, making small mistakes to seem appropriately challenged. When Professor Johnson asked how her practice was going with La Campanella, she would just shrug and say, "It's really hard, but I'm trying." Her classmates had started to feel sorry for her. Katie, the music major, offered to help her with basic technique. Tom, who was struggling with his own piece, at least felt better knowing someone else was having a harder time. Maria, the retired teacher, brought her encouraging articles about adult learners and late bloomers. "Don't give up," Maria said after one particularly difficult class. "My grandmother didn't learn to read until she was 40, and she went on to become a librarian." Lisa smiled and thanked her, feeling guilty about the deception but not ready to reveal the truth. By the end of the first week, something shifted. Lisa was playing through the entire piece slowly but accurately. Her fingers remembered the challenging passages, the dramatic leaps, the thunderous climaxes. She wasn't at performance level yet, but she was getting there. The second week brought a different kind of challenge. Lisa was no longer just remembering how to play the notes, she was remembering how to make music. The subtle rubato that made phrases breathe. The way to shape a melody so it soared above the accompaniment. The dramatic timing that could make an audience hold its breath. These were the skills that had made her special as a young performer. Technical ability was one thing, but musical intelligence was rarer. And as Lisa practiced in her small, forgotten room, she realized it was still there, waiting for her to claim it again. Wednesday morning of the second week, something magical happened. Lisa was playing the most difficult section of the piece, a passage that required her right hand to play a rapid melody while her left hand provided rhythmic accompaniment. Suddenly, everything clicked. Her hands moved independently but together, creating the illusion of multiple pianists playing at once. For just a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot about hiding, about her job at the hospital, about the years of silence. She was just a musician making music, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. The sound echoed in the small practice room, and Lisa realized she had been playing with full emotion and technique. If anyone had been listening, they would have known immediately that she was no beginner. She stopped abruptly, looking around nervously. The hallway was empty, but her heart was pounding. She had almost blown her cover completely. That afternoon, Lisa couldn't concentrate at work. Her supervisor had to call her name twice to get her attention. "Lisa, are you feeling all right? You seem distracted?" "Sorry, just tired," she said, but that wasn't true. She felt more awake than she had in years. Thursday's practice session was different. Lisa had made a decision. She was going to play the piece the way it was meant to be played, with full technique, full emotion, full artistry. She couldn't keep pretending to be less than she was, not with this piece that meant so much to her. She played it through 3 times that morning, each time with more confidence. By the third run-through, she was playing it at full tempo, with all the dynamic contrasts and musical nuances that made it spectacular. The old piano in practice room C had never sounded so alive. When she finished, Lisa sat in the silence for a long moment. Her hands were shaking, but not from nervousness. They were shaking from the pure joy of playing music at the level she was capable of. She thought about her classmates, about Professor Johnson, about the performance that was now just days away. They were all expecting her to struggle through the piece, to make a valiant effort, but ultimately prove that she had been given something too difficult. Instead, they were about to discover who she really was. Lisa packed up her sheet music and walked out of the building into the afternoon sun. For the first time in 12 years, she felt like herself again. The quiet hospital clerk was still there, but underneath was something much stronger, the artist she had never stopped being. The performance was in 3 days. Lisa was ready, but she wondered if her audience would be ready for what they were about to witness. Some secrets, she realized, were meant to be revealed, and some gifts were too powerful to stay hidden forever. The day of the final performance arrived with all the ceremony of a small-town talent show. Room 240 had been transformed into a makeshift concert hall, with chairs arranged in neat rows facing the old upright piano. Family members trickled in throughout the afternoon, carrying flowers and cameras, ready to celebrate their loved one's musical achievements. Lisa sat in the back row, watching the preparations with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing between memories of past performances and worries about what would happen when her secret was finally revealed. Her parents had wanted to come, but she had discouraged them. "It's just a small class recital," she had said over the phone. "Nothing special." The lie tasted bitter in her mouth, but she wasn't ready to explain why their daughter, who they thought had given up music forever, was suddenly performing again. Professor Johnson walked to the front of the room, adjusting his tie nervously. He had organized dozens of these student recitals over the years, but there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the way Lisa had been acting lately, quieter than usual, more distant, like she was carrying a heavy secret. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "Today we celebrate the hard work and dedication of our intermediate piano students. Each performer has chosen a challenging piece that represents their growth this semester." The audience applauded politely. Lisa counted about 30 people, family members, friends, a few music faculty members who had nothing better to do. "On a Thursday afternoon, we'll begin with Katie, who will be playing Chopin's Minute Waltz," Professor Johnson announced. Katie walked to the piano with confidence, her high heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She had dressed for the occasion in a black dress with pearls, looking every inch the serious music student she was. Her performance was solid, technically clean, though perhaps a bit rushed in places. The audience applauded enthusiastically, and Katie beamed as she took her bow. Next came Tom, who had chosen Batch's invention No. 1. He was visibly nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he sat down at the bench. His performance was careful and deliberate, with a few minor stumbles that made him wince. But he pushed through to the end, earning warm applause from the supportive audience. Maria, the retired teacher, played Debussy's Clair de Lune with genuine emotion, her years of life experience adding depth to the gentle melody. She had tears in her eyes when she finished, overwhelmed by the joy of finally learning to play a piece she had loved for decades. One by one, the students performed their chosen pieces. Some played beautifully, others struggled but persevered. Each performance was met with encouraging applause and proud smiles from family members. As the recital progressed, Lisa felt her anxiety growing. She had been scheduled to perform last. Professor Johnson's way of ending the recital with what he expected would be either a surprising triumph or a cautionary tale about reaching too far beyond one's abilities. "And now," Professor Johnson sighed, consulting his notes, "we have Lisa, who has taken on quite a challenge. She be performing Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire." The audience shifted in their seats. Even those who weren't musicians had heard of Liszt, and they sensed that something significant was about to happen. Lisa's classmates exchanged glances, some looking sympathetic, others curious to see how the quiet woman from the back row would handle such an impossible piece. Lisa walked to the piano on unsteady legs. She had chosen to wear the same simple black dress she wore to work. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention to her appearance. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore no jewelry except for a small silver watch that had belonged to her grandmother. She sat down at the bench and adjusted it slightly, her movements automatic and professional. The room fell silent, that particular kind of silence that happens when an audience is holding its breath. Lisa placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her to play on an old upright piano in a house that smelled like cinnamon and stories. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to pay for her lessons and support her dreams. She thought about all the performances she had given as a child, when the future seemed limitless and music was the most important thing in the world. Then she began to play. The opening notes of La Campanella rang out with crystalline clarity. The first few measures were deceptively simple, a gentle melody that gave no hint of the technical fireworks to come. But there was something in the way Lisa played even these simple notes that made the audience sit up and take notice. "Professor." Johnson's eyes widened. The touch, the tone, the musical phrasing, this wasn't the playing of a struggling intermediate student. This was something else entirely. As the piece progressed, Lisa's transformation became impossible to ignore. Her fingers moved across the keys with supernatural precision, navigating the treacherous passages that had defeated countless advanced students. The rapid scales sparkled like actual bells, each note perfectly weighted and timed. The dramatic leaps that should have been impossible to execute cleanly were performed with the casual confidence of a master, but it wasn't just the technical perfection that stunned the audience. It was the musicality, the way Lisa shaped each phrase with mature artistic understanding. She played with the authority of someone who didn't just know the notes, but who understood the very soul of the music. The room had fallen into the kind of silence that musicians dream about: complete, reverent attention. Cell phones that had been ready to record proud family moments were now capturing something far more significant. This wasn't just a student recital anymore. This was a revelation. Katie, the music major who had been the star of the class, sat with her mouth slightly open. She had studied this piece in music theory classes, had watched professional recordings online, had always considered it beyond her reach. Yet here was Lisa, the quiet woman who had seemed to struggle with simple exercises, playing it with the skill of a concert artist. Maria, the retired teacher, had tears streaming down her face. She had been around music education long enough to recognize true talent when she heard it. This wasn't just someone who had practiced hard for 2 weeks. This was someone who had lived with this music, who had made it part of herself years ago. Professor Johnson stood frozen at the side of the room, his mind racing. How had he missed this? How had he been fooled for an entire semester? The woman playing his old, beaten-up piano like it was a Steinway grand was clearly a trained professional, someone with years of advanced study and performance experience. The piece built to its climactic sections, and Lisa met each challenge with increasing brilliance. Her left hand provided thunderous accompaniment while her right hand danced through passages that would challenge even conservatory graduates. The tiny practice room piano had never been asked to produce such sounds, but under Lisa's touch it responded like a thoroughbred racehorse. As the final notes rang out, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the audience erupted into applause. But it wasn't the polite, encouraging applause that had followed the other performances. This was the kind of applause reserved for something truly extraordinary. Lisa stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She had just exposed herself completely, torn away the careful disguise she had maintained for months. There was no going back now. The quiet hospital clerk who sat in the back row was gone forever, replaced by the artist she had never stopped being. The applause continued, building rather than fading. People were standing now, their faces showing a mixture of amazement and confusion. They had come expecting a simple student recital and had instead witnessed something approaching magic. Lisa looked out at the audience, seeing her classmates' shocked faces, Professor Johnson's bewildered expression, the genuine awe of strangers who had just heard something they would never forget. For the first time in 12 years, she felt like herself again. The applause seemed to go on forever, echoing off the walls of the small classroom that had been transformed into something magical. Lisa stood beside the piano, her hands still trembling from the performance, not sure whether to bow or run. The faces staring back at her showed everything from amazement to confusion to pure wonder. Professor Johnson was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Lisa, we had no idea. He walked toward her slowly, as if approaching something rare and precious that might disappear if he moved too quickly. Where did you learn to play like that? The room fell silent again, everyone waiting for her answer. Lisa looked around at the faces of her classmates, people who had spent months trying to help her with basic techniques, offering encouraging words when they thought she was struggling. Katie, the music major, was staring at her with something that looked like respect mixed with embarrassment. Tom looked like he was questioning everything he thought he knew about talent and hard work. I studied at Juilliard, Lisa said quietly, her voice barely carrying to the back of the room. And later at the Moscow Conservatory. The silence that followed was deafening. These weren't just good schools, they were the pinnacle of musical education, places where only the most gifted students in the world were accepted. Moscow Conservatory? Professor Johnson repeated, his voice filled with awe. Who was your teacher there? Lisa hesitated for a moment, then spoke a name that made several people in the audience gasp. Professor Elena Volkov. Professor Johnson actually stepped backward. Even the non-musicians in the room could sense the significance of that name from the reactions around them. Professor Volkov was a legend, a teacher who had produced some of the greatest pianists of the last 50 years. Students waited years just for the chance to audition for her, and most were turned away. But how ... Professor Johnson started, then stopped. Why are you here? Why didn't you tell us? Lisa looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just produced music that transported everyone in the room. Life happened, she said simply. My father had a heart attack when I was 18. My mother couldn't work. I had to choose between my music career and my family. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. Everyone was hanging on her words, understanding that they were witnessing something much more significant than a surprise performance. I gave up my scholarship, moved back home, and started working to support my parents, Lisa continued. I thought it would be temporary, maybe a year or two. But then there were more medical bills, more emergencies. The years just disappeared. Maria, the retired teacher, spoke up from the audience, her voice thick with emotion. 12 years, she said, connecting the dots. You haven't played seriously for 12 years? Lisa nodded. I sold my piano to pay for my father's surgery. I haven't touched a real instrument since then, except for the past few months in your class. The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. 12 years of silence. 12 years of one of the most gifted musicians any of them had ever heard working night shifts at a hospital, filing papers and answering phones. Professor Johnson shook his head slowly. Lisa, what you just played, that level of artistry, doesn't just come back after 12 years. It takes most people decades to develop that kind of musical understanding. Some things you never really forget, Lisa said with a sad smile. They just get buried under everything else. A woman in the front row stood up suddenly. She was older, well-dressed, with the kind of presence that suggested she was used to being listened to. Excuse me, she said, addressing Lisa directly. I'm Dr. Patricia Wells from the City Symphony Board. I came here today to support my neighbor's grandson, but what I just heard... Lisa, would you be willing to audition for our orchestra? Lisa looked stunned. I don't know. I haven't performed professionally in so long. What you just played was professional level, Dr. Wells insisted. We're always looking for artists with your kind of talent and maturity. The symphony needs someone who can play solo pieces with the orchestra. The pay isn't much, but it's steady work, and it would give you a platform to rebuild your career. Other voices joined in. A man in the back row introduced himself as a piano teacher who ran a music school downtown. I'd love to talk to you about giving lessons, he said. Students would line up to learn from someone with your background. Katie, the music major, finally found her voice. Lisa, I'm so sorry. All those times I tried to help you with basic technique ... I must have seemed so condescending. Lisa turned to her with genuine warmth. You were trying to be kind. That means everything to me. But why didn't you tell us? Tom asked, still looking bewildered. Why pretend to be a beginner? Lisa thought for a moment before answering. Because I was scared, she said honestly. Scared that too much time had passed, that I'd lost everything that made me special. Scared that if I tried to come back and failed, I'd have to accept that the most important part of myself was gone forever. Professor Johnson nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. So you came to my class to test the waters, to see if the music was still there? And you forced me to find out? Lisa said with a small laugh. When you assigned me La Campanella, I thought I might die from terror. But it also felt like destiny, maybe. That piece was one of my favorites when I was young. The audience began to stir, people standing up to get closer to Lisa, to congratulate her, to ask questions, but she held up her hand gently. I want to thank all of you, she said, her voice getting stronger. For the past few months, you've given me something I didn't know I needed. You've reminded me that music isn't just about talent or training or perfect technique. It's about joy and sharing and connecting with other people who love the same things you love. She looked at each of her classmates in turn. Watching you all learn and grow and challenge yourselves has been just as inspiring as any concert I've ever attended. You've shown me that it's never too late to start over, to try something new, to become who you're meant to be. Dr. Wells approached Lisa with a business card. Please think about the audition, she said. The symphony world needs artists like you, people who understand that music is about more than just showing off. It's about touching people's hearts. As people began to gather their things and prepare to leave, Lisa found herself surrounded by well-wishers and new opportunities. But the most meaningful moment came when Maria, the retired teacher, took her hands. You know what you've done here today? Maria said, her eyes bright with tears. You've shown all of us that dreams don't have expiration dates. That sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the deepest struggles. Lisa squeezed Maria's hands. And you've shown me that it's never too late to come home. As the crowd dispersed and the room slowly emptied, Lisa sat back down at the old piano. She played a few soft notes, nothing fancy, just letting her fingers feel the keys one more time. Professor Johnson approached her. Lisa, I owe you an apology. I thought I was challenging you to grow, but really I was just forcing you to remember who you already were. Maybe that's what I needed, Lisa said. Sometimes we need someone else to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves again. She stood up and gathered her things, the same worn notebook she'd carried to every class. But everything else had changed. The quiet woman who had sat in the back corner, invisible and overlooked, was gone. In her place was an artist who had found her way back to herself. As Lisa walked out of the building, she could hear other students still talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. Tomorrow, she would call Dr. Wells about the audition. She would start planning for a future that once again included music at its center, but tonight she was just going to go home and call her parents. After 12 years of silence, she had so much to tell them about the music that had never really left her heart.